This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to tonight's episode of Ingles on the Beat. We've got a really special program for you. We got our hot and cold segment. We're going to go down some rankings. We're going to talk about some Georgia preseason football. And I'm going to have a co-host, Cody Chaffins, joins me. Really excited to have Cody beside me. And Cody, what do you think? Another season for the Dawgs, another national championship?
It sure looks that way. We're all gearing up for that, Mike, for sure. It's an honor to be on the show with you. You've been on this beat for such a long time. I covered my first Georgia game back in 2005, shot the Tech game that year, and been covering it ever since. So it's cool to be on the beat with you and chopping it up a little bit. And, yeah, we've got a big show today. Like you said, last week we got to hear from the coordinators. We haven't gotten to get your take on that, so I'm excited to hear that. Here's about some of those rankings and your thoughts on the first AP poll getting put out today, and then the hot and cold segment. It'll be my first ever hot and cold segment, so looking forward to that with Anytime HVAC helping us out there. But first things first, Mike, the one thing we did get over the weekend was he had a scrimmage from Georgia, and although we weren't allowed in, some folks were, and also some cameras were. And Georgia's been doing this for a while now, where they kind of put out a video, and it's really quickly cut. And you're not supposed to be able to take anything from it. So we, people like me, we go Zapruder film, frame by frame, right, and punch through. And what did we see? What did we not? And I'll tell you just a couple of things that I took away from that. One, I guess seeing a couple of true sophomores making plays in there. One is Anthony Evans. It looked like he was coming around on the end around. Oscar Delp was blocking for him, so that tells me it's early teams reps. Sounds like the ones. But Anthony Evans is a player, at wide receiver or some kind of gadget man, especially on special teams. We expected a lot more coming this season, so it was a good sign to see at least a little flash in that little video, Mike.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, he's a really exciting player, and we saw him flash. We saw him in the Orange Bowl do some things. I mean, this is an explosive receiver that just has to settle into the offense and get more consistent. This is a guy, Kirby Smart said, has to realize that every day counts, every rep counts. And in early practice, he was calling Anthony out. I guess he dropped a punt at some point in the morning. Kirby said, "I saw that, Anthony. I was inside watching." This is the kind of dynamic player that Georgia needs to develop within the program. We've seen it receivers. They've had some impact from some transfers, but this is a guy that came in as a freshman, and I think Coach Coley and certainly Mike Bobo, they're going to want to get Anthony Evans involved. You mentioned that end around that he broke in the scrimmage, and I think he's looking at being a return man as well. So I think this is one of the players that we're going to see grow in the program over the years and, could have a pretty major impact this year as well.
Yeah, last year he gets just one carry for 2 yards. We're already seeing it right now. They're already repping that. That made the script. When they go out, they've only got so many scripted plays. For that man to be getting a scripted play tells you something.
Well, no doubt about it. He's not the only one, though. Rod Robinson caught a wheel route. I don't know what was and wasn't on that clip. I missed that, but I've talked to some people that were there, and they said Rod Robinson did a really nice job on a wheel route, catching the ball downfield. And you don't necessarily expect that from your 240-pound tailback, but this is yet another element of the Georgia offense with Carson's ability to process so quickly. And, Mike Bobo has such a diverse offense. When he goes to the line, there's so many options, and you find the matchup. And when you've got players at all the positions that can do their job, that really puts defenses in a tough bind. And on this particular play, Rod Robinson able to pull in a wheel route and beat a safety out there. So that was really big. You mentioned Evans' big play. Arian Smith, the guy that's lining up on the perimeter. We've seen Arian make a lot of big plays over his career, but another guy that Kirby and offensive coordinators have said they want to be more consistent. Arian Smith may be the fastest guy in the league, Cody. If you can keep this guy on the field and make him a 3-down player, it's going to make Georgia that much more dynamic. I mean, look, we all know that, Ladd McConkey's off to the NFL, and certainly Brock Bowers was a great threat. Who are those playmakers going to be in this offense? And you wonder if Arian Smith's time has finally come. He's getting a lot of opportunities. And with that speed, it's not just the deep ball. If you get him in space with some room to operate, this is a guy that's literally got some jets. I mean, this is a track guy. Well, a football guy that used to run track, probably runs in the low 4.2 range in the 40. And yes, you heard me right. He'll probably break Eric Stokes' Georgia combine record of 4.25. A really exciting player. Had some injuries early on, but he's worked really hard to develop that football body, get a little bit thicker, a little bit more durable. I look for Arian Smith to be involved early and often in the Georgia offense.
Yeah, and he's got to get his confidence as well. We talked to some of the players. We had our players roundtable and talked to them. And Terrence Edwards tells us, yeah, he can be great. He needs to get touches early to build his confidence up. But I want to go back to something you had on this program, SEC Media Days. You sat with Cole Kublik, and he said Georgia's offense may be better this year without Ladd and without Brock Bowers because you don't have to schedule those touches for those guys. When you had Brock in the lineup, you're malpractice if you don't get him the ball 6 times in a game. But because you don't have those already planned out, you got to get it, got to let Ladd touch the ball these many. There's so many weapons, you can use them all more freely without having to go through and say, hey, we have to get it to this guy.
Oh, no doubt about it. And you've got a second-year quarterback in Carson Beck now that's just that much more comfortable in the offense. He's had an all off season to work as the number one. Remember last year, he was still competing for the job with Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton over the summer. And those reps were split up a little bit more. But now this is Carson Beck's team, and he's got a comfort zone working. Most of these guys were here in the spring. And, Benjamin Urisic, the Stanford tight end.
Urasic, we learned last week. Urasic.
Oh, Urasic.
Yeah.
Wow.
Todd Hartley corrected us very quickly. He said it's a Polish last name, Urasic. We've all been saying it wrong. So there
Benjamin
you go.
Urasic.
Urasic.
See, he's already made an impact with his pronunciation of his name. And I expect he'll make an impact on the field. That tight ends room with Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky emerged. I understand he had some catches in this scrimmage. And this was a guy that they were very excited about last spring. And then, of course, Lawson Lucky with the ankle injury last fall. Now he's healthy. Oscar Delp, we know what he can do. He's the consummate tight end. He's going to move the pile. You mentioned that blocking on the Anthony Evans run. He's also really adept at sitting in the zone. Now, maybe not the run after the catch of Brock Bowers, but I don't know if there's been a tight end in history that runs after the catch like Brock Bowers. But to Cole's point, there are a lot of different weapons. Now, I would suggest the offense is better for a different reason. I mean, Carson Beck being a second-year quarterback is an obvious answer, and Mike Bobo and his second year knowing this personnel even better, third year in the program. I think the run game is what makes it different. I think Georgia's offensive line, particularly the interior offensive line with guys like Tate Ratledge, moving the pile in there. Now Georgia's going to be able to play a little bit of power football, but they've got the speed on the edges as well, and they were missing that last year. Kendall Milton and Dajon Edwards, they're already doing great things in the NFL. You saw Kendall led the Eagles in rushing, and I think Dajon ripped off a run of more than 20 yards with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But they didn't have their health. There were times, I think we learned later, that Dajon was playing with a sprained knee the first 8 games. We know Kendall had hamstrings. And Georgia just wasn't that prolific running team that we'd become accustomed to. This year, a lot of thunder and lightning back there with Frazier and Etienne bringing so much speed and heat from the backfield. And then guys like Rod Robinson and Branson Robinson that can move the pile. So I think the run game is going to set Georgia up to have a more explosive offense because, Cody, when you stay on schedule and it's 2nd and 5 and 3rd and 3, that defensive coordinator, he doesn't know whether you're going on the ground or whether you're going to be throwing the ball. They can't pin their ears back and come after the quarterback. It's not predictable. It was Todd Monken that taught us about run-pass conflict. And when you stay on schedule on your down and distance, it puts defenses in run-pass conflict. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. So not just the players that Georgia has, not just the prolific quarterback projected number 1, but the ability to stay on schedule with Mike Bobo's play calling and that run game is going to make Georgia more explosive than ever.
You talk about that run game. Another guy whose name we heard coming out of that scrimmage was Nate Frazier. And Nate Frazier is a guy who, ding, 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 it is our own Mike Griffith. We're doing a series on YouTube now, The Most Important Everything, The Most Important Freshman. Well, who was the guy that said Nate Frazier might be the most important freshman? That was you, Mike, so you called that one right, and he's already turning heads. A lot of folks talking about him after that scrimmage.
Well, I'll tell you what, the first time I saw him chopping it up, and drill work typically doesn't tell you much because there's no tackling and they rarely run plays, but watching this guy's footwork was amazing. The quickness just jumps out at you. He's just a smidgen bigger than Etienne, but you're talking about a 5-star guy that came out of the most, I guess it's the best football league in the country out there in Southern California, the Trinity League. Same high school as JT Daniels. So this guy's already played high school in an elite level. We're used to talking about the Georgia guys playing at elite level. We know that. We see them right here in the Peach State. You get these out-of-state guys, you never really know unless they're an IMG guy. But here's a guy that played big time high school football and blew everyone away. He's explosive. He has power. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. And we do have to keep it in the back of our mind. We really don't know Trevor Etienne's status for that opening game. So this is a player that could have impact much, much earlier than you might expect from a true freshman.
One thing I love hearing about Nate Frazier, too, is he split carries in high school. Had a really good running back, actually younger than him, but kept the right attitude. You can see the way he acts, and that was one thing that Jeff Santel has told us over and over. This guy's attitude is so good because we won't get to talk to him anytime soon. But if you're going to be at Georgia and you're going to be the number 3 guy, you can't get in your feelings when you're not getting carries, and it seems like already he has the right attitude. All right, the other thing that happened while Mike was away last week, we got to hear from Georgia's coordinators and, I guess, co-coordinators. The one thing that stuck out, first time we heard from T-Rob, Travaris Robinson, as a Georgia coordinator, and some really good stuff from here. He was really engaging, whether it was talking about getting up early and make Malachi Starks making him run so he could lose some weight a little bit. He also talked about talking smack to Carson Beck across the field. Mike, as you go back and kind of revisit these interviews, what stuck out to you from Travaris Robinson?
Well, I'd heard a lot about T-Rob at the Combine, Cody. I talked to a lot of the Alabama players that played for him, and you always want to go to those players and find out what they think of their coach. And the thing they talked about was the energy and the enthusiasm and the intensity. And again, I've said this a few times. I haven't heard this at Georgia yet, but at Alabama, they called it the DOA defense. Dead on arrival. Now, that's probably not politically correct, and if I've offended anybody, I apologize, but these young men do think in very violent terms between the lines, and T-Rob is a guy that can get him pumped up. He's a guy that's been there, too. Don't forget, he was an all-SEC player, just like Kirby Smart, albeit at Auburn, and then he became Will Muschamp's protege. This is a guy that studied under Will Muschamp at South Carolina, at Florida, and he speaks the same language. So while the delivery may be a little bit different, he's obviously very effective motivating players. He has the same mindset, the same terminology, and that works really well for Georgia because Will and Kirby kind of came from the same school of defense, and they worked together for years. And it's not like Will's gone. Will's still around. That's the good news. So I'm excited about T-Rob. I mean, I think you're looking at a guy that will probably be a head coach in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe even sooner. A great leader of young men, kind of took over that defense. They didn't really talk about it, but the inside word was he was calling the defense for Kevin Steele by the end of the year. I don't think Nick Saban would announce something like that, but he did get the guys fired up. I do think he's already made an impact. It's another voice back there, and he had some big shoes to fill. Now, Fran Brown wasn't in a coordinator role, but he was a leader back there before he became the head coach at Syracuse. So I think this was a pivotal hire. I think it's underrated that you took Alabama's defensive coordinator away from Kalen DeBoer and you put him on that Georgia staff and married him with Glenn Schumann, the guy they call the professor. So to me, it's a great mix. It's an exciting mix. And with a secondary that has some pieces to replace, they lost 3 guys that were drafted in the top 100 of the NFL, some obvious holes to fill. But when you've got that level of expertise and enthusiasm and energy back there, I think it's going to make it easier to fill those holes than maybe some of the people think.
Not only called Glenn Schumann, they've called him the professor. He called him Rain Man, which if we're talking not politically correct, Mike, is it a compliment to be called Rain Man?
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but that particular movie character had an amazing ability for recall. And of course, they took him to the casinos. I'll say this. I don't think it's any gamble to say that Glenn Schumann is one of the best defensive coordinators in the nation. And another guy that we expect to be a head coach before long. And I know Georgia fans are probably rolling their eyes saying, geez, don't get everybody hired, Mike. Well, here's the deal. When you win championships or you have 13-1 seasons, people come looking, and Glenn Schumann has already been considered for jobs, and I'll bet you T-Rob has too. So more success for Georgia means more success for these coaches. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's why you get the best guys to come and work for Kirby Smart, because they get inside a championship level program and they see what it takes every day. And Nick Saban did some good things, but just like T-Rob said, Kirby's expounded on that, and the game's changed a lot since 2015 when Kirby was at Alabama. And I'll be honest, I get a little tired of hearing everybody say he's just doing what Alabama, because that's just not true. Think about all the changes since 2015, whether it was the COVID seasons and the different protocols that were put in place. Certainly roster management now is completely different with these liberal transfer rules and NIL dealings. You got to be able to maintain your locker room and keep that team together. You know, I was on a show this morning on the SEC network, and they were talking about Kirby Smart. and the skull sessions and how important that was. And I don't think Kirby gets nearly enough credit for that. And it sounds cliche when you talk about a player-led team or a team of brothers that believes in each other. But we saw that play out in a bowl game. We saw it 63-3. We saw one team where every healthy NFL draftee played, every single one of them. They could have said, this game doesn't matter. It's not a playoff game. We're going to opt out. But instead, they opted in. And I don't know why more people didn't write about Georgia opting in, because everybody says, oh, there's so many problems with NIL and players playing for themselves. And oh, my goodness, what are we going to do? What are we going to legislate? Well, how about you coach them up? How about you build a team like Kirby Smart builds a team where the players want to play for one another, or in this case, play for the G. So I don't think you can underestimate that aspect of this team. I think it's one of the winning edges that Georgia has, is the way these players play for one another and play for the G. And I think it has a lot to do with Kirby being a Bulldog himself, and Mike Bobo for that matter, and Will Muschamp. And now you bring in a guy like T-Rob, a former All-SEC guy who really gets it. I really like the chemistry on this team so far, Cody. I think things are rolling for the Bulldogs. It's been a great preseason.
You talked about Mike Bobo. He's one of those reasons he got his job is because the coaches got elevated. Todd Monken gets an NFL job, but we also got to hear from Bobo. We only hear from Bobo every now and then. I thought it was really interesting. We talked about it a little bit last week on DawgNation at Large and DawgNation Daily, but Mike, you know this from being in the locker room. It's really dangerous to say, what do you want to see out of Carson Beck in his second year? Because he can say he can get better at everything. He can give you that canned answer. But we asked Mike Bobo that at Orange Bowl Media Day, and he said specifically, didn't have to answer specifically, chose to answer specifically about the deep ball. Kind of got asked a general question again about Carson Beck. What can he do better? And instead of, he can do everything better. No, he said specifically he can get better at the deep ball. It tells you something, Mike, when a coach comes out and tells you what he's thinking, because that doesn't always happen. And that says, on my mind, that is big priority number one as they go into fall camp.
Well, it tells you the confidence that he has in Carson. When they're able to openly challenge these guys in the media and in the fan base, they know that Carson's going to respond to that. They've wanted Carson to put more of himself into the team, maybe show a little more emotion. And Carson's a pretty cool cat by nature. He's a pretty easygoing guy, very likable guy, certainly one of the most likable guys in the locker room. But every now and then they want him to stick his foot up somebody's tail when they don't get the job done, or they want him to show some exuberance and, maybe bring a little bit more charisma to the huddle, because it can be infectious. When your quarterback is pumped up and you've got some momentum, you want to see that from a guy like Carson. I mean, he's a guy that everyone listens to. And, I talked to Tate Ratledge about that earlier in this off season, one of the preseason press conferences, because Tate and Carson are very good friends. And, obviously Tate doesn't have any problem speaking his mind. And he said, yeah, he's been in Carson's ear hole a bit and told him, look, you're the quarterback, you're the voice, and people are going to listen to you. So I think Carson will choose his words wisely. I do think he's going to be more assertive. That was a challenge from Kirby Smart in the spring. And so far this fall, all indications are that Carson Beck is on track to be that more vocal leader, maybe show a little bit more emotion, more charismatic. And yes, he has worked on the deep ball. Last scrimmage, probably not his best, but still very good, and certainly good enough for Georgia to win a lot of football games this year.
You talk about, showing more emotion on the field. And so we kind of have this thing going on where we heard, Kalen DeBoer telling Jalen Milroe, I want you to celebrate at practice, run down the field and go crazy. And we kind of talked about how Nick Saban would not be having that. So is this a change from what Georgia is doing to tell Carson Beck to be doing that more? Because, again, that kind of feels a little bit strange, where it's kind of like, let's keep it even keel. We want to turn to our quarterback and see him not get too high or too low.
Sure. Well, I don't think you're going to have a problem with Carson's poise in the clutch. He's played in a lot of big games, won a lot of big games, lost a big game. And that loss was a real motivator for Carson Beck. I'm not sure if Carson Beck is back here if Georgia wins a national championship last year. And I don't think that's going to make anybody feel any better about the SEC title game. But, it kind of left a box for Carson to check. He could be starting. I really believe this, Cody. He'd be starting for the Denver Broncos if he had gone to the NFL. I mean, this is a really talented player. He's so cerebral. He's got so much arm talent. And yeah, he's got to work on the deep ball, but we're kind of getting picky there because he makes all the difficult throws. He's got a really quick release, but he's good at getting you in the right play. As far as Jalen Milroe, I don't know if that's a guy you really need to tell to get more excited from what I've seen. I kind of wonder, kind of be careful what you wish for there. But Carson, on the other hand, is very poised, holds his emotions in check, does not panic, and certainly that does bring a calming presence. But you're just looking for that extra. And I kind of feel like the offense this year, in particular, is going to be getting that extra. There's been so many times, I think, where Kirby's maybe, I don't want to say dialed it down, but maybe gone to the ground a little bit and just run some of these games out. I think Kirby Smart is looking for a more explosive, high-scoring team. Now, part of that is he's got a young secondary, and you're going to need some points, when you play against some of these top teams. I mean, my goodness, I think they play, 3 or 4 teams in the top 15, maybe 4 or 5 even. Clemson, I saw it kind of getting into that little range. So I think Kirby knows they're going to need some more points to be comfortable. And I think he knows Carson came back to score more points. And it would really behoove Georgia if Carson was a number 1 overall draft pick, because he does look like the most talented guy since Matthew Stafford in a Georgia uniform at that position.
That was one of the things that worried me. Everybody's talking about Carson back in the Heisman. My thought was Kirby takes the air out of the ball in the second half of these games just to move on. And thinking, a longer schedule, maybe he would do that even more. But you think there's going to be stats enough for Carson Beck to be putting up those numbers that are going to pop off the page at people to win a Heisman?
Well, I think so. I think the most important thing is the 1-loss record. I mean, we saw that with Stetson Bennett. I mean, poor Stetson didn't make first team All-SEC, but he was a Heisman Trophy finalist, which tells you a lot about his place in college football and what he was able to accomplish his second year. You look at the Georgia offense from 2021 to 2022, and it was very different. Todd Monken did a very good job of building an offense around Stetson Bennett's strengths and maybe avoiding some of his weaknesses. Second-year quarterback, second-year coordinator. I think they can do the same thing for Carson Beck.
Yeah, he'll definitely get a chance to build his resume as the season goes on, because Georgia's playing a lot of top 10 teams. The AP poll came out for the preseason. We will go through that. We'll go through some of Mike's SEC power rankings. That's all still to come right here on the Beat, presented by Ingles.
At Ingles, we're proud to work with hundreds of local farms and businesses in the communities we call home. Not only does it ensure that you get top quality fresh items for your family table, it's a way for us to support the amazing individuals who pour their heart and soul into delivering the very best they can do. Quality, freshness, community, it's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Here at DawgNation, we know there is nothing better than Georgia's first game, especially when it's an opponent like Clemson. But as someone who's lived in Atlanta for the last 6 years, I know that getting to Atlanta could be a hassle. Whether it's hotel, parking, or traffic, it's a pain, and that's the last thing we want you to worry about for the opener. So DawgNation is here to help, along with our partners at Discover Dunwoody. If you've got tickets to the game, Discover Dunwoody will take care of everything else. Their VIP package includes 1 night at the Hyatt Place perimeter, luxury round-trip transportation to the DawgNation tailgate, and a one-of-a-kind swag bag that includes an exclusive DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. So let Discover Dunwoody get you to the big game and back in style. For a stress-free weekend, you can register at atlsportstrips.com. Again, that's atlsportstrips.com.
Welcome back to On the Beat. I'm Cody Chaffins with Mike Griffith, and we now know that Georgia-Clemson game to kick off the season will be a number 1 versus number 14 matchup. The AP Top 25 getting released, a preseason poll today. And Mike, as we took a look at that poll, not a whole lot different from the coaches poll. I think 1 through 10 was exactly the same, and it's Dawgs on top.
This now, and we talked in the first segment, 5 Georgia opponents ranked in the top 15. I mean, that is just eye-popping, and yet it doesn't seem intimidating. I guess we're all listening to Kirby Smart, 1 game at a time, right? You focus on Clemson, and then you have an easy game, and then you get to go to Kentucky, and it's Brock Vandegrift and Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and then you get the bye week. Then you play the Crimson Tide on September 28th in a game that I think we all have circled. But yeah, this is about the pecking order that many of us expected. 3 SEC teams in the top 5, 4 in the top 6. Says a lot about the league. Maybe a preview of what the college football playoff might look like. 12-team playoff this year. Pretty exciting to think or to know, I suppose, that Georgia's going to be in the college football playoff this year. I can't imagine Georgia falling outside the top 12, but it is interesting to take a look at this top 15 teams, top 12 teams, and ask yourself, could all these teams really make the college football playoff? Is it possible? So many of them play one another. Could Missouri really be a fifth team in the top 12? I don't know. That seems like a lot to ask. They are from the Show Me State. I suppose you'd have to show me that. 5 SEC teams out of 12. Cody, I would cap it at 4 SEC teams making the college football playoff.
Yeah, when I look at some of these, like you talked about, all these teams are going to play each other. So whether it's Georgia going at Texas, at Alabama, at Ole Miss, somebody's going to get a loss there. You talk about now, because of the way these conferences are, Ohio State and Oregon is a regular season game. That's coming up on October 12th, but that game feels early enough. Those teams will fall a little bit. And I think this year, because the conferences are so much bigger and they're all so much more compact, there's going to be losses. And because you got to be top 12, I feel like now this year more than any other, it's about where you are in the preseason, how far you're going to fall, but also pretty losses, because losses are going to happen. Pretty losses are going to be important.
They are. And then we have to ask ourselves, what happens to the conference championship game losers? How punished do they get? I mean, if you got two-loss teams going into the SEC championship game and one of those teams plays in the SEC title game and the other doesn't, how much do you punish that team that loses, that got there, that was one of the top 2 teams? So those are some questions that the committee will have to answer at the end of the year. I'm with you. I do think the starting place does matter. I think it makes a big difference. And I do think that there's going to be some interconference games that'll be pivotal. I mentioned 4 SEC teams in the top 12, that AP top 25. I see 4 Big Ten teams. I don't believe 4 Big Ten teams are going to make it. They're certainly not all in my top 12. You see Utah maybe skating in. What is that, from the revised Big 12? We're going to have to kind of reacquaint ourselves with the teams in the conferences. My goodness. You got a couple of those West Coast teams now in the ACC. Boy, that's going to be a tough trip for the volleyball team. So there's still a lot of wrinkles to be ironed out, but it only whets my appetite, because when November gets here, instead of maybe 6 or 7 teams that we're looking at making the 14 playoff, we might be looking at 25 or 30 that could still make the 12-team playoff. So I think this is a good step for college football, and I think it was a necessary step. You add some postseason games, and that means revenue. All these schools now are searching for different ways to pay the players now that this is a part of the sport, while still maintaining some of these non-revenue sports. And so obviously it's going to take more money to do that, bigger television packages, and I think that's what's led to the expanded playoff.
Really interesting, too. It's only because of the conferences, like we've been saying, there's only 4 conferences represented in the top 25. To think at some point a Conference USA team is going to work its way in. You talk about, some of the other conferences are going to work their way in as well. So having just 4 conferences just feels so strange. And those numbers about how many Big Ten versus how many SEC just feel kind of skewed now, because you got to include Oregon in the Big Ten. You got to include Texas in the SEC. So it's hard to feel good about that if you're the SEC, because, you're talking about, of course, you've got Texas counted as a top 5 team.
No doubt. You wonder about the Liberties and the Boise States and the Tulane, some of these teams that have had some. Cincinnati. I don't know if Cincinnati's ready to recover from Luke Fickell going to Wisconsin yet, but some of those programs that are maybe been on the periphery, and, now all of a sudden, they're going to have opportunities to make this 12-team playoff. And how will they fare? Do they belong in there? Is a 4-loss SEC team better than a 1-loss Conference USA team? I mean, again, another tough question for the committee. In the conference realignment, there's a lot of challenges. The Big Ten, they play a 9-game conference schedule. And I know there's been some talk about maybe the SEC doing that as well, but I'm not sure that would be a good move. Again, we don't know how the College Football Playoff Committee is going to evaluate these SEC teams on their schedules. You mentioned a moment ago, pretty losses. Well, is a pretty 3-loss SEC team better than a 1-loss Liberty team? Again, hard to say what they're going to do, and really hard to quantify. I do think the SEC this year is probably as good as it's been in a minute, because a lot of quarterbacks are coming back, because I think there's a lot of offense in the league. And I think the Big Ten has certainly been enhanced with the addition of Oregon and Washington, USC and UCLA. Getting that number 2 television market has made the Big Ten more valuable in their television rights deals, and challenge the SEC now. How are they going to keep up? Do they need to add that 9th conference game? Or do they just got to go out there and start winning national titles again? Michigan was able to sneak through this year. And of course, we see Jim Harbaugh excuse me, punished with a 4-year show cause. And do they take that title away? Is that something that's taken into consideration? It certainly seems soiled to me. One thing I'll say about Georgia, this is year 9 for Kirby Smart. And not only did he win back-to-back titles, and not only did he win 29 games in a row, and not only have they not lost a regular season game since 2020, but there's no major violations here. And I think that's something that, fans maybe take for granted until their program gets hit. I know that talking to some people in Michigan, they're trying to explain it away and it's the NCAA's fault and the NCAA is unfair. Well, the NCAA didn't have somebody dressed up in a costume spying on other teams. So I don't think that Michigan's the only place this happened. I'm sure there's some other things going on, but they got caught. Is that something that's in the back of the minds of the College Football Playoff Committee when they evaluate these programs? Who's done it the right way and who's done it the wrong way?
What did you make of Jim Harbaugh standing up there? I absolutely do not apologize because I did nothing wrong. And I know, we may be bringing the Sparty out of you a little bit, but tell me what you thought of Jim Harbaugh standing up there. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, deny, right? Look, Jim Harbaugh's got his championship trophy and he's got an NFL job and, Ladd McConkey's playing for him out there in Los Angeles. So, it wasn't the time or place for him to fall on the sword, but the truth of the matter is, and, we could do a whole sidebar on this. I don't know how much fans would enjoy it, but the fact is that the programs that have cooperated with the NCAA in the past have not fared well. Yeah. And, that's probably one of the problems with the NCAA is, the programs that have cooperated with investigations seem to get hammered a little bit more. The investigation seems to drag out a bit more. And it does seem like some of these programs get taken care of a little better than others. Although in Jim Harbaugh's case, they brought the hammer down, albeit after he'd already left for the NFL.
All right, we talked about the Southeastern Conference, Mike. Let's talk about just specifically those teams. You got some power rankings you can tell us about. How do you see the SEC stacking up preseason?
Well, I don't think I'm going out on a limb picking Georgia number 1 in the SEC. I think the Georgia's a dynamic program. Obviously, I'm high on Kirby Smart. This is the 7th year that I've covered Kirby. He's a very unique individual. I don't think people on the outside really get it. I know Georgia fans do because they pay close attention to Kirby. They get it. He's not going to stand in front of the microphone with any song and dance, at least not the live microphone in front of the media. Now, the locker room's a different story, and I think it matters more in there. Kirby will tell you it's time to eat, and he's able to motivate players. He's able to develop players. He's able to hire great coaching staffs. He's built a great program. He usually gets all the best talent in state, the players that fit the program. Some players from Georgia, they don't always fit Georgia. They need to find a different culture. But the players that are very serious about their football and want to go against the best every day, and yes, that could mean wait 2 or 3 years for your opportunity. Those are the guys that fit in. And I think he's got a locker room full of those guys. You look at the transfers that he brings in. These are character guys. Not going to bring anybody in that's going to upset the apple cart, so to speak. That's not to say that they're perfect. They're not. But they're team guys and they're hardworking guys. And I think you'll see that bear out over their careers. So I like the way Kirby team builds. I like the way he motivates his players. I think he's vastly underrated as a coach. Certainly he helped Nick Saban win 4 national titles as his defensive coordinator and chief recruiter. So Kirby is a multi-talented. It's just hard to get him to talk about it, Cody. He doesn't really want to talk a lot about himself. And even when we throw those questions out there, he's going to talk about the next game or he's going to say he should have won one more. But that attitude, that glass never full attitude, I think that goes through the team. And I think that level of elite means something. I remember Nakobe Dean telling a story one day about how he had an interception in a game, and Kirby pointed out he could have made the interception even better. It's just never enough. There's always a way to do things better. And I guess that goes back to the team slogan this year, assume nothing. I mean, hey, this team won 29 games in a row. My goodness. They lost 1 game by 3 points, and suddenly they get erased from the playoffs, which, I still think they were one of the 4 best teams in the country, although obviously Texas beating Alabama brought some transitive properties into the equation. But Kirby's attitude, his hunger, fierce competitor, 2 national titles is great, but they didn't win one last year. He reminds his team of that often. He keeps them humble and hungry. And I think that's what makes him such a great football coach.
I will tell you, you talked about the transfers and brings in great transfers. We got to mention Ra Thomas in that moment. So the exception to the rule of the way he builds teams, and I appreciate what you said there. You look at the rest of the SEC. You talk about bringing back so many quarterbacks, and you look at Quinn Ewers. He's with the number 4 team. Number 5, Jalen Milroe's back. Ole Miss brings back Jackson Dart, Brady Cook. So when you talk about all of these quarterbacks coming back, you think they all step up and take a next step this year? Is there one guy out of that group that kind of you can see kind of shining a little more and maybe hanging out in New York at the end of the year?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate domestic personal issue there. I think Carson Beck. I thought Carson flashed at times. I think training wheels would be too harsh of a term, but I think early on they kind of kept Carson reeled in a little bit. He had to get comfortable. He had to earn the trust of Mike Bobo and Kirby Smart. He's certainly done that now. What did Kirby say in the spring? Time to let the cat go play. Ole Miss looks like they have a complement of great receivers, but they lost a marquee running back. And, Quinshon Judkins is not going to be easy to replace. And there's a lot of new personalities in that locker room. And anytime you bring in that many transfers, quite a bit, over 20, I believe that more than 30 players in Ole Miss is too deep are transfer players. You wonder a little bit about the culture should they face some adversity. Now you look at their schedule and I don't see anything jumping up early on, but come end of the season, things are going to get tough over there in Oxford, Mississippi, certainly when the Bulldogs come to town. And how are those transfers going to handle that? At Texas, Isaiah Bond is a really talented player, certainly did a lot for Alabama before he transferred to the Longhorns, but I'm not ready to say he's A.D. Mitchell. A.D. Mitchell was a difference maker. Georgia fans saw that with the touchdown catches he made in all those playoff games, and certainly he made a difference for Texas when they played against Alabama. So I'm not quite sure those shoes have been filled. I believe there's an injury there in the Texas backfield they're a little worried about. The defensive line is, I don't want to call it suspect, but I would say unproven. They did bring in some transfers. So I think the quarterback is reliant upon the supporting talent and the defense. What do you ask him to do? So I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on Quinn Ewers. I know he played a perfect game against Alabama last year, but that was then. This is now. Jackson Dart has a new locker room to work with. We don't know what challenges might await him, and he lost his marquee running back. Brady Cook doesn't have his running back either. And, some programs, Cody, and I don't know, I don't want to make this too much of a challenge, but the reality is some programs aren't built to handle success. They haven't shown us that they can stay hungry. They haven't shown us that they can handle success. And Missouri, I would put into that category. Eli Drinkwitz had a wonderful season last year and beat an Ohio State team that had some opt-outs, but still an Ohio State team. That's a marquee win for the program. They're recruiting really, really well. They're getting a lot of the players that Oklahoma used to get. But I'm not convinced. I'm a doubting Thomas when it comes to Missouri's ability to handle success. We'll see if Brian Kelly, the winningest coach in Notre Dame history, if he can get it going again at LSU. I know he's talking a big game, but my goodness, Jaden Daniels was so special. So it's going to be very interesting. Texas A&M has a very talented quarterback as well. Can he stay healthy? Mike Elko in his first year. But you take the lot of those. Jalen Milroe, I don't think we could ignore him. He certainly came up big in the clutch against Auburn on the Milroe miracle and then played just well enough to beat the Bulldogs with that fourth down throw and completion, incompletion, depending on how you saw the replay. But the 30-yard scramble was legit. Out of that pack of players, I wouldn't be surprised to see 3 SEC quarterbacks among the Heisman Trophy finalists.
Such a strong group this year. You talk about Missouri, and the schedule does set up for them. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt. So they'll be 4-0 as they go to take on Texas A&M in College Station on October 5th. Ole Miss, the same thing. Just a week early schedule. Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern before they go to Kentucky September 28th. So going to be interesting to kind of watch those teams rise and fall and see throughout the year who gets hot and who gets cold. Speaking of, we will have our hot and cold segment brought to you by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. We'll have that coming up after the break.
Want to make sure your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new trained HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
Great to have Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing sponsoring our hot and cold segment. Mike, take me through. This is my first ever hot and cold, so show me how it's done.
Wow. Well, right off the bat, I think it's pretty hot to see these preseason polls and to see Georgia, pretty much everybody's number one. I mean, we suspected it, we thought it, but until they vote, you never really know. But everybody sees Georgia as the best program in the country. And Cody, that's important because that tells you about perception. Now, I know Kirby will tell you that it doesn't matter, and certainly it's not something that they focus on, and they don't even focus on the playoff rankings until the final one comes out. But think about this. Vince Dooley, certainly one of the greatest coaches in SEC football history. Do you know he never had a top 5 preseason team at Georgia? That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And Mark Richt had 3 of them, including one number 1. But Kirby Smart's done this now, I believe, 7 years in a row. The Dawgs have been a preseason top 5, which tells you how high this program's been elevated and how much respect that they've earned. So number 1 is good. Top 5 means something. Certainly recruits pay attention. It keeps you in the spotlight. It keeps you in those marquee games, those marquee matchups. And, great players want to play for great teams. So I do like the preseason polls. And the fact that Georgia's number 1 is a badge of honor. It's something that maybe players from the past have earned. And it's almost like a tradition, for these players to carry on. They don't want to be the first Georgia team that doesn't earn that respect or have that vibe or feeling about them. So I'm going to say the preseason polls, even though it's much what we expected, and there've been a lot of way too early polls, if you will. But to me, I think polls are always red hot. I love to see what other people think and how they evaluate programs. Certainly our view from Athens, Georgia or Atlanta, Georgia is sometimes different. I'd like to think that we have more insight. And I think most of us would agree Georgia's number 1. But what does the rest of the country think? And to see the Bulldogs number 1 says a lot for the program that Kirby Smart has built and the national respect that they have for this university in Athens.
And I think you talked about earlier the Florida State game, and what did that show? Well, it not only showed that this Georgia team is hungry, and they're hungry to get back on top, and it was one of those things that probably contributed them to being the number 1 preseason team this year.
Oh, no doubt about it. And we've heard Kirby talk about that. We've heard Carson Beck talk about that. Most importantly, it's what the players are saying. Everybody wants a coach-led team, and everybody professes to have one, but it's simply not the case. You've got to have that leadership. And so when people talk about Georgia missing some guys on defense, or maybe they don't seem to have quite as many stars, I said, well, wait a minute now. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you remember back last spring of 2023, I think Kirby called out a couple of his veteran linebackers and said, you guys aren't practicing like you're trying to make the team anymore. Need to see that hunger. Need to see you step it up. Now, he didn't use the word complacency, but that was what I sort of suspected. When you've got a lot of guys that haven't done it before, big name guys from high school or guys that were backups that have been chomping at the bit to get their chance, those are the guys that are going to be hungry. They may have a ring, but they may not have done much more than drink out of their water bottle a couple of years ago. Now it's going to be them out there fastening their chin straps up and trying to earn their stripes. So I like the youth on the defense. I think that's exciting. And I think it adds to the hunger factor, which would be one of the other hot things for Georgia in this fall camp, is hearing the names of so many freshmen, Cody. I mean, you've already talked about the talented freshman running back from California. KJ Bolden is a name that continues to come up. And I look at those 2 guys as potential impact players in their first year in the program, even some of the sophomores. Anthony Evans was a guy, like you mentioned, had about a 60-yard end-around run. Only a sophomore, only a second-year player. What did you say? He had 2 carries last year, maybe? Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at this guy having a much larger role. Lawson Lucky. A lot of us thought he'd make an impact as a freshman, but that ankle injury really slowed him down. Not the other day at Scrimmage. They were throwing the ball early and often to him. So there's a lot of young talent on this team. And I think that's really hot for Georgia because these are the guys that are going to be carrying the championships into the future.
I'll tell you who was hot last week, Mike, was you. Hall of Famer. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a Hall of Famer on the program. Mike gets inducted to the Greater Lansing Sports Hall of Fame. Tell me about that and tell me what an honor it had to be included. You mentioned some of the names earlier that were on that list. It's a pretty impressive list.
Yeah, me and Magic Johnson and John Smoltz, right? And those are some Lansing area folks. But I guess being a media guy, it's really humbling because so much of my job, we talk about the quarterback being dependent on the talent around him. Cody, I don't think I'm in that Hall of Fame if I'm not covering the Georgia Bulldogs these last 7 years. I mean, let's face it, when people call up for interviews, they're not calling the Vanderbilt beat writer. I've been blessed to be in a position here at DawgNation now 7 years and covering a prolific head coach that's intrigued so many. So many good stories have come through Georgia. One of my national writing awards was about Stetson Bennett. I mean, you'd have to be a pretty bad writer not to get that story right. Talk about a Hollywood script. So I've been blessed to cover some great teams. I had an undefeated Auburn team in '93, an undefeated Tennessee team in '98. Talk about right place, right time. I've had that Forrest Gump effect, it seems, and I like to think that I've worked hard for it. I'm pretty passionate about being a sports writer or sports analyst, whether I'm writing about it or talking about it or sitting here doing video. The adrenaline just flows when I think about championship teams and how hard they work, and really wanting to tell the audience about that, and how many different angles can I take, and how many different perspectives can I share, what thoughts, maybe we can trigger with some of the insight we have from the people that we have access to. And that's really our job, is to reflect history. So again, it's very humbling. I grew up in that community, started out in that community, covered some Michigan State teams that fared well. But more than anything, it makes you appreciate the people around you. Look at the production staff. You and I are sitting here on the screen, but there's so many people behind the scenes that, make this look like such a quality production, whether it's graphics or whether it's the production, the timing, the organization. So much goes into it. And so when you stand up there on the other side of that podium, and you always hear people thank so many people around them, whether it's an athlete or, in my case, a journalist, it's really true. I've had a lot of mentors and people that have shown me the light, and I've been blessed to be right place, right time. And for the last 7 years, that'd be Georgia. And once again, I'll say it again. They're not calling the Vanderbilt beat writer to come on these shows and give opinions. So very fortunate to cover the Georgia Bulldogs and work for DawgNation and Cox Enterprises. I mean, some of the things we've done with our media team, whether it's Brandon or Jeff or Kaylee or Connor, and now yourself, and Jay Black behind the scenes. What a big addition that was to get a pro like that organizing these shows. That makes all the difference in the world. So I'm very thankful and appreciative, and it's something that I think a lot of people deserve credit for, not just me.
That's big time, Mike. Congratulations. You mentioned Stetson Bennett. Can he be hot and cold at the same time? He threw 4 interceptions. And then did Stetson Bennett things in the Rams game. He throws a touchdown to Miller Forrestall, the Alabama guy, by the way. On the last play of the game, he did that old Stetson, just kind of cut around and cut back around the corner. It was really, really impressive, but also threw 4 picks in the game.
Well, I don't think the Florida game, and what was it, 2019 or 20? I think it was 2019. He might have had a tough game like that. But the fact of the matter is it's not just Stetson. He's got teammates around him. It's an early game. They're trying new things. He's in a great position as the backup. I believe the first 2 games, the regular backup might be suspended. So he's going to be next man up for Matthew Stafford. He's obviously got a great mentor and leader, and Matt Stafford, a future Hall of Famer, a former Bulldog that we talked about a little bit earlier in the show. He's out there in Los Angeles, prime time. They love the story. They love his personality. And, Stetson had a year away and looks like he's put himself back together. And, he's in that underdog role once more. This seems to be where he's comfortable, Cody. He's kind of got him right where he wants him right now. So I'm not going to say too much about 4 picks, and I'm certainly not going to bet against him. It's a story that I think we're all following, and I know a lot of Georgia fans are pulling for Stetson.
We're excited to see that. He is a winner. He has proven that time and time again. All right, you got any colds?
Not really. Not for me. I'm not feeling the Debbie Downer
effect. It's the dog
today.
days of summer. There is no cold.
The dog days of summer is the best time of year for the Bulldogs, because right now they're battling it out. They're fighting it out. I haven't heard about any serious injuries any more than we already knew about earlier. Knock on wood for Georgia and Kirby Smart. It's really all systems go. Now Clemson's going to be a really good football team, and they're going to be ready. They're going to have something to prove. I'm not quite ready to write Clemson off as a college football playoff contender. In fact, right now, I'd predict that they will make the college football playoffs. So it's a hot time of year because we're talking about Georgia. We got more content than ever on DawgNation.com. Again, people see Brandon every day at 10 a.m. on DawgNation Daily, and Jeff comes at you Wednesday nights with the recruiting, and Kaylee and Connor and all their fun hot takes on Thursday nights. And then the written content that we do as well. A lot of previews going on. And today we have the polls up earlier today, Monday. And of course, I did my SEC Power Poll my thoughts on that. And, we might try to do something a little different with that moving forward. So a lot of opinions, a lot of takes, a lot of notes, a lot of information. And so it's as hot as it gets for me, the preseason. Everybody's undefeated, man. Everybody's feeling good, even Vanderbilt.
Yeah, if you don't have cold at your house, you need to call anytime heating. All right, Mike, we really appreciate it. We're going to hear from Kirby Smart for the first time in a while coming up on Tuesday. Is there anything you want to hear from Kirby quickly?
Well, I mean, Kirby's going to have some motivation. He's going to tell you that they're not ready yet. There's a lot of things that they can still do better. We'll be listening closely for that. But every now and then he'll throw us a bone and tell us about a freshman standing out or a player that's making an impact. And, obviously his read on the scrimmage is going to be much different than the bits and pieces we can get from the boosters and some of the other folks that were at the scrimmage. So it's going to be interesting to hear the head coach's message. And anytime he talks about Carson Beck, I listen closely because I feel like he's talking to Carson through the media as much as he is the media and the fans. So it'll be interesting to hear the message for Carson Beck and hear for some of those new names, transfers or freshmen that may be standing out.
I really love the way you said that because that's such an interesting take. That makes us all take in what Kirby says tomorrow in a whole different way. We'll be looking out for your stuff on DawgNation.com, as well as Connor Riley will have stuff covered there as well. Appreciate it, Mike. This is my first On the Beat. I'm not going to be here next week. We'll do it again in 2 weeks, and then we'll hit the ground running as we get busy for this season.
Pretty hot start for you, Cody. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, this is On the Beat, presented by Ingles. We'll see you next week.